Hello, Sooner Nation. OU Insider subscribers, of course, Coach Clinton enthusiasts and Field Vision fanatics, OU, Texas. I don't even know the word. If you celebrated OU winning over Texas, this podcast is for you. This is another episode of the Oklahoma Drill. My name is Jesse Crittenden, and I am alongside my co-host, as always, Mr. Coach Brian Clinton. Sir, how are you?
I'm good. I'm contemplating going and getting matching tattoos if you're down for that.
Oh man, we should get Oklahoma Drill matching podcast or matching,
Absolutely.
podcast
Let's
tattoos.
let's do it.
I love
I'll,
that.
I'll get a caricature of you and you get one of me, and it'll be great.
I was gonna say, I know, because I think Danny Stutzman and Jaron Kanik have already, they've got the horns down. We can, we got to have our own. I think that I like the caricatures idea
Yeah.
a lot. I like that idea. Man, I've got to say, before we kick things off, obviously we're here. It's OU's bye week. We've had a lot of time to digest Oklahoma's 34-30 stunning signature win over Texas over the weekend. But Brian, I'm actually going to start this off by saying I've had a couple of people since the game on Saturday remind me that during the offseason and earlier in the week, I predicted Texas to win in a close game. So I am here to eat a little bit of crow about that. But I'm going to say a couple of things. One, I genuinely told some people throughout the week that I felt a little bit more I felt better about OU's chances as the weeks went on. When I looked at film, when I went through the numbers. And the second thing is, if anybody watched my conversation with Jason Sukamel from Orange Bloods, I said Oklahoma can absolutely win this game. What they're going to need is Dylan Gabriel to have a really, really good game, and they're going to need the defense to force turnovers. And that's exactly what happened. And not that Oklahoma necessarily needed those, but I think that was the recipe: is defense causes chaos. Dylan Gabriel comes through in a really big moment. That's exactly what happened. So, but all that being said, I'm here to eat crow, Brian. I think you predicted OU to win, so you've got this one over me.
I had the Sooners winning 33-31. I was pretty close to what actually ended up happening. Which I was happy about that, but I think the thing that I was most happy about was I thought that Oklahoma had a really good chance to um, be the more physical team at the line of scrimmage. And I remember talking about that in the week leading up to the game, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, no, coming off the bus, Texas does look like the more physically imposing football team. They do. When you've got a guy like T'Vondre Sweat sitting at 360 pounds right there in the anchor at the defensive line, like, I mean, yeah, of course you want that kind of guy there. But whenever it came down to it, a freshman with the right mentality and the right mindset went in there and neutralized a guy like that. So it was really promising. It was really, really good for Oklahoma. And they showed that, you know, this team's capable of playing with those rosters, even if they're not where they want to be just yet.
I'm glad you mentioned the physicality, because that was my takeaway. I thought, look, if you're Oklahoma, and all of this is in the context of last year being disappointing, this year's team is better, but I think we all were kind of under the impression that this is still a little bit of a rebuilding effort under this team. So I think, this season. So I think going in, I was thinking, man, if Oklahoma can play Texas to a draw on the lines of scrimmage, that's a really good sign. And I don't think it was a draw, Brian. I think OU got the better of this Texas team on both sides of the ball. I mean, you look at defensively with 5 sacks on the day. That's a season high. And that doesn't even fully tell how much pressure this OU defense generated and that defensive line generated. You got great performances from Ethan Downs, who I thought was honestly one of the stars of the game, and DeJoun Terry and Isaiah Coe. Played really, really well. And then offensively, I think it was a little bit more of a battle, but the fact, I don't think Dylan Gabriel took a sack that game. And You see the Walter Rouse play on that game-winning touchdown to Nick Anderson, blocking two guys like that, giving just enough time for Dylan Gabriel to make that throw. That's the thing, is all of a sudden, I think in one game, especially when you look at the lines of scrimmage, it's like this goes from, I mean, this is still not the full complete team that we're going to have on, that OU is going to have under Brent Venables, but it's all of a sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, is this team a lot more ready than we thought they were?
Yeah, well, and it comes down to everybody doing their job. I think that what this team understands perhaps better than last year's is that if all 11 aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing at the same time, all it takes is one. All it takes is one to bust. And they've really done a good job of plugging up those holes. You don't have those you don't have nearly as many of those busts. You don't have nearly as many of those mental mistakes. And I think that just speaks to what the coaching staff has done this offseason. I mean, just, the 49 med balls before every workout and after every workout, like those things matter. And I think at the end of the day, the thing, the intangibles that come with that mental toughness that you can't put on paper and see is what ended up making the difference in this game. And that's what happens when you have a very tightly contested team or game between two teams that are very, very similar on paper. So it was good. It was a really, really good showing for Oklahoma, and it effectively puts last season behind them and changes the narrative that Oklahoma is a team that's not capable of doing whatever it wants.
That's a really good point. And I think that goes into, I think, why, a couple of months ago, I thought coming in, I just thought, Texas probably has a little bit of an advantage. They're going to win in a close game. Because I think in my head, this is still a rebuilding effort, but it's clear that this team is just already farther, like much farther along than I think anybody could have anticipated. And so, I mean, I think we'll talk about the defense a little bit more in a minute. But Brian, I think one of the things, looking offensively, one of the things I said going in is, with the running back inconsistencies through the first 5 weeks, I thought, look, they're probably not going to explode for 8 yards a carry, right? But they're going to need to run the ball a little bit better than they have. Now, the running backs as a whole had some decent moments. I think Tawi Walker has, I think, established himself as the best running back on this team. But I think really what the difference was, Brian, was Dylan Gabriel's running ability. 113 yards, 14 carries. He was by far the most efficient, most productive runner. I mean, I think only 4 of his rushes were scrambles. Mm-hmm. So that means 9 of his rushing plays were quarterback designed play calls. And they worked. And that's what we've seen over the last, 3 weeks, is Dylan Gabriel's running ability becoming more and more of a factor. And I think that's what stood out to me, is not only Dylan Gabriel having a real impact, but that, I think, becoming a necessary part of this offense.
Hey, fellas, let's be honest. No woman wants to see their man throw away their hygiene, right? All women love a well-manicured face and beard. That's why I ordered the handyman to make sure my neck and beard line looks the best it can, not only for my wife, but for the OU Insider lives and podcasts. My other recent order to make sure I continue to have an even, fresh-looking beard was Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit, because it was everything you need to tame your mane. Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit is a cordless trimmer that comes in 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. That's right, all with one guard, 20 different links. Get the sweetest treat this Halloween by going to manscaped.com and use promo code OU Insider for 20% off plus free shipping. Again, go to manscaped.com and use the promo code OU Insider for 20% off plus free shipping.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, I think, looking at this in the scope of, we've got 6 games to go off of, I think at this point we see just how much this coaching staff values consistency, because the guys that you're seeing get time on the field and get snaps are the guys that are consistent. You know exactly what you're going to get whenever Tawi Walker trots out there. You know exactly what you're going to get whenever Dylan Gabriel trots out there. He's been there and done that before. On the offensive line, I mean, Bill Bedenbaugh's been a guy that sends consistent guys out there for his, the entirety of him being at Oklahoma. But I think we're seeing that kind of bleed over. And it's something that you hear. It's something that you hear Brent Venables preach and talk about it. Those small things matter, the little things matter. And I think that the consistency is really what's showing up to me, because sure, guys like Gavin Sawchuk have a ceiling that, I mean, I don't think it's arguable. His ceiling is higher than what you have when you got a guy like Tawi Walker. But if you're not going to
excuse my cat,
you're fine, man. If you're not going to consistently get the right kind of play out of him, but you can get 3 or 4 yards out of a guy like Tawi, that's what you want. And then with Gabriel, I mean, what better time to have a career high in rushing? I mean, he looked great. He is running with a lot more confidence this year, but he's also he looks faster. He looks like he's more decisive in what he's doing, and the cuts that he's making, there's not. You can tell that knee feels good. You can tell that he is back to feeling himself. So, I think that's going to be something that teams are going to have to plan for moving forward, and that's obviously a good thing for OU.
Yeah, I think it's to the point where we've seen enough of a sample size that I think they're going to need Dillon Gabriel to run. Now the balance is going to be, how do you make sure he avoids taking a lot of big hits? Right. And that's going to be tough too. He took a couple of big hits in that game, but I even think of, the 44-yard run in that fourth quarter that, set up a field goal that Zach Schmidt missed. And I guess going back and looking at it, and Brent Venables even mentioned on Monday that, there was kind of a weird gust of wind that happened right when he kicked that. But that 44-yard run is what set up a kick that could have really been a difference maker. I think we've seen enough to know he's going to be, that's going to be necessary. And then I think you look at defensively, Brian, and I think the takeaway for me, and we've kind of said this before, and Brent doesn't necessarily love the bend but don't break mentality, or the idea or mentality, but that's what we're seeing. And I think, like, coming into the game, I knew Texas is going to make plays. They're going to make some plays. They're going to get some chunk gains. That's just what's going to happen. And you see that with, Texas having 527 total yards. And that's a lot. And there were moments, particularly in that second half, where Texas was moving the ball pretty well. But I think what stuck out to me was all of the things that we've seen through 5 weeks with this defense, again, coming into play, whether it's takeaways, again, 3 more takeaways for this OU defense, 2 more interceptions. They lead the country in interceptions with 12. But it's also red zone defense. Texas only scored on 1 of its 3 red zone trips. Brian, they only converted on 5 of 14 third down attempts. All of those things are things that we saw through the first 5 weeks. And that, again, came up. So I think it's one of those things that it doesn't really matter how many yards you gain if you come away from it only with 23 offensive points. I think if you're an OU fan, you were coming into the game thinking the defense is only going to give up 23 points. I think you take that every day of the week. But, Brian, are we starting to see maybe this defense find an identity? And, whether those stats I mentioned or other things, just the way they play, what guys they like to play. I think, are we seeing this defense find an identity?
I think so. And really, when you look at the bend don't break, I know that he obviously that's not what they're telling the guys, but with the style of offense that we see in college football, the majority of everybody's running RPO style offense at this time. And so what you see is between the 20s, you can move the ball up and down the field. You've got all the space to work with that you need. You can run those longer concepts in the passing game, and it opens up more space underneath. It just gives the offenses more room to work with. Well, when that field shrinks and you get down in the red zone, it obviously, you either come away with points or you don't. And so, what I was looking at while you were talking, Oklahoma ranks 50th nationally in total defense. They're allowing 352.8 yards per game. However, they are 9th in the country in red zone defense, only allowing points scored 63.6% of the time. As you mentioned, they lead the country in turnover margin. They lead the country in interceptions. And then on third down defense, they are, I believe they're 12th or 11th or 12th in the country. And so situational football, playing situational defense, they have really done a good job tightening up in the areas that they need to be more effective. And so when it comes to Brent Venables' fingerprints being all over this defense and them having this new mentality, I think intensity is really the word that hits for me, because Brent Venables is an intense guy. There's no question about it. Everywhere he goes, you hear his players talk about, he wakes up and shows up at the office, and he's the same guy he is when he leaves at night. He's intense throughout everything that he does. And I think that you can see that in those moments, especially, I just keep going back to the goal line stand.
And I should have mentioned that, just how incredible that stand was.
There are the effects that moment, the effects that stand will have. I mean, effectively, really, if you think about it, the narrative that Oklahoma doesn't play defense is
gone.
It's quelched. It's gone at that point. And I think that at that point in time, everybody who was watching that game, all 8.1 million people that were watching that game on television, they realized this is different. This is not the same Oklahoma defense that would just break right there and give up 6 points. And so I think that's a really big deal, especially going into the bye week. You have this entire back half of the schedule now. You can build confidence off of that. You can take the coachables and improve, get healthy, and in the back half of the schedule, you feel really, really good about what you've got on that side of the ball.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the goal line stand. I mean, that truly was, it was one of the most impressive defensive sequences I've seen from OU in a long time. I think I thought it was just impressive just to hold them on the first couple of tries. Honestly, right. What we've seen from this defense in the past is, I just thought, and Texas was moving the ball so well to that point on that drive. I just thought, well, they're going to score on the first play inside the one. But again, to see Kip Lewis, who hadn't really played up to that point, making plays, to see Dasan McCullough and Billy Bowman and guys make plays, it really was impressive. And Brian, I think overall my takeaway has just been, you needed both sides of the ball to make plays to win that game. Yeah. And I think if you're thinking about what Brent Venables is trying to build, and I think trying to build a more complete program, I think that's the perfect example. As great as that game-winning drive was, and OU needed that to win, you needed the defense to do things that it did for the offense to even have a chance at that point of the game to win. So overall, really, I mean, one of the most incredible Red River rivalry games we've ever seen, one of the most impressive OU wins we've ever seen, and I think given the context of Brent Venables' tenure, what last year was, the SEC move coming this year, specifically what the goals can be, it's hard to get more impactful and more significant than that. But Brian, you mentioned it there. OU's on a bye week now. I think a much needed bye week after how emotional that win was, and it also comes at the midpoint of exactly the midpoint of the regular season. So I think this gives us kind of some time to kind of look through, not only what's going on right now, but what we've seen through the first 6 weeks. So Brian, I kind of turn this to you, and we've talked about it a little bit, but if I were to ask you to name, an MVP or a player who has stood out at each position group, on both sides of the ball, who are you? What names would you throw out?
Quarterback's obviously Dylan Gabriel. I mean,
controversial.
The odds.
Hot take.
All you got to do is look at the Heisman odds. Before the season started, he was plus 5,000. He's worked himself up. He's 12-1. He's fourth in the Heisman odds right now. So, he's been terrific. That's a no-brainer. Tawi Walker is your running back. I think right now, if you need a guy to go out there and get you 4 yards, he's the guy that's going to do it. If this team's going to go where they want to go, I think somebody else is going to have to step in there and be the 1B to what he is. I do think you need somebody else to emerge there. On the offensive line, It's going to have to be tackle. It's going to have to be either Tyler Guyton or Walter Rouse. I think both of those guys have been very, very important, and they've been consistent on the offensive side of the ball. Wide receiver, you could go Andrell Anthony, and I'm sure we'll talk about him more later. But
yeah,
I think I'm going to go Drake Stoops. You could make the argument Nick Anderson just leading the school, leading the team in receiving touchdowns, but I think Stoops is just, especially when they needed it, the two big plays that they needed to get down the field. The first completion was to Stoops, and then the 28-yarder to set him up in the red zone was to Stoops. And so that's a guy that I think you could absolutely go with there at wide receiver.
I mean, he leads the team in receptions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, he is on pace. He's on pace, Brian, just for the regular season. He's on pace to finish with 58 receptions.
Wow.
His career high, which was last year, I believe was 36.
Oh yeah.
It was mid-30s.
Yeah.
He's second on the team. I mean, he is on pace to finish the regular season with 59 receptions, over 500 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns.
Wow.
Insane.
Yep.
Really, really impressive. But go ahead.
Do you want to do offense before we go to defense? Or
yeah, I think I agree with essentially with all your picks. I'm glad. I think Tawee Walker, he's not been the unsung hero, but I think what he's shown through 6 weeks is, at some point, I think we all had ideas that it was going to be Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk leading this backfield. But I think at some point, I think halfway through the season is enough of a sample size, unless something changes. Tawee Walker needs to be the running back getting the most carries. I mean, he leads the team in rushing yards, despite seeing 7 fewer carries than Marcus Major. He's 239 rushing yards on the year, 4 touchdowns. He leads all running backs in touchdowns. He leads all running backs in yards per carry at 4.5. Tawee Walker, it's not only just his production on the field, but given that I don't know if anybody predicted he was going to have a role at all on the offense.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. And I really think at wide receiver, I really like the Drake Stoops pick a lot. I think my pick still would be Andrell Anthony, which we'll talk about that here in a second, his season-ending injury. But what he did for this offense is really, he stretched the field. He went up and made, caught 50-50 balls. He made plays in space. Completely obliterated his 2-season total at Michigan in 5 games at OU. Just really impressive. Then on the offensive line, I do agree with you. I think it's been the tackle spots. I think Walter Rouse in particular has been really, really impactful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Linebackers is just as easy as quarterback. I mean, Danny Stetson's playing at an All-American level. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. I think we really saw, if we're going to call Cheetah its own spot, you could go Peyton Bowen there. And I think that Peyton Bowen definitely deserves some credit for some of the plays that he's made, but I mean, he's been all over the field. He's played several different spots. And so I'll say him, and I will also give Dasan McCullough some credit for, he really showed up in that goal line stand, made impacts on almost every play. And so big time from him. So he and Peyton Bowen at safety. I'm going to go Billy Bowman. I mean, the guy has been steady as can be, makes plays every game. The way he separated his childhood best friend from the football, to allow Kendall Dolby to take that interception there, was huge. Obviously it ended up in a blocked punt, but you got to make plays when they're out there. At corner, it's Gentry Williams. I know that when Woody Washington's name's not being called very often,
that's a good thing.
That's a good thing when you're playing corner. That means nobody wants to throw the ball at you. But for Gentry to emerge as the other guy and become that style of playmaker that he's become is huge for this defense. And then interior defensive line, it's been Dejon Terry. And you could give that to either one of those guys. Again, kind of like corner. Your name may not come up a whole lot, playing the interior. It's kind of a selfless position, but when he's in, you can see the difference. And then at edge, it's got to go to Ethan Downs.
It does.
I think. I mean, that guy, especially with what he's coming off of the game he just played against Texas. Anybody who doubted him this season, I mean, I think the guys that have been lightning rods for some reason for the fan base, it's like those guys have been the ones that have really emerged this year. So it's been good. It's been good for him.
No, I think I agree with every thing you just said. I think the only thing I'll highlight is, you mentioned Ginger Williams, who leads the team in interceptions with 3. I think he's been pretty good overall in one-on-one coverage. I think he's done a lot of what Venables has asked him to do in the scheme. Wanted to point out about Danny Stutzman, just again to speak to how incredible his season has been. He leads the team in tackles with 58. Nobody else on the team has more than 35. And Jaren Kanak is the one that has 35. So it goes Danny Stutzman 58, Kanak with 35, and then Woody Washington with 26. That's 1, 2, and 3. And he has 10.5 tackles for loss on the season. Nobody else has more than 5.
Isn't that his season high? Isn't that? I believe that's his single season high already.
So. It is. It is. Just incredible. And then I'm really glad you pointed out Ethan Downs, because I think the reality is there were some disappointed fans, or fans that were disappointed in his performance last season. And I think it was reasonable considering how bad the defensive line was, but the talent has always been there. And I think he's kind of been a true unsung hero. I mean, he led the team in sacks and tackles for loss against Texas. He had 2 each. I think he's had, like, quietly a really, really big impact for this team. He has 3.5 sacks on the season, Brian. That leads the team. He leads the team in sacks through 6 weeks. So I'm really glad you mentioned him. I think he's a guy that hasn't gotten enough credit. So I'm glad you mentioned him there. And, I think the other thing, in addition to, kind of looking at the first 6 weeks, I think the big question moving forward, Brian, is how does this team move forward without Andrew Anthony? A guy that, I think he led the team in targets, at least through 5 weeks. As I mentioned earlier, he leads the team in receptions. That's a big loss. Now there's wide receiver depth there, but it's a big loss. And I don't know how you replace him necessarily in the aggregate, or like as a 1-to-1, it might have to be several pieces, but how do you think this team moves forward without Andrew Anthony?
So, losing a guy like that leads the team in receiving yards, and it's never good to lose your wide receiver 1. And he was a true wide receiver 1 for this team through 5 games. He was an exceptional route runner, did a really, really good job creating space underneath for himself, became a guy that Dillon Gabriel really liked to target on 3rd downs. And then obviously, as you spoke to earlier, he was really good at stretching the field for this team. And so he did a lot of things for the Oklahoma passing game. So the first thing, what I think it comes down to is you've got to see Drake Stoops and Jalil Farouk pick up more of. They're going to have to pick up more. They're going to have to be more involved, even so, than they have been, which is kind of crazy to say. But you're going to have to see Jalil Farouk and Drake touch the ball more. You're also going to have to see Austin Stogner continue to build off the performance he just had against Texas. He's going to have to be more of a target over the middle. But at the end of the day, what this really does is it kind of alleviates a problem that Jeff Levy's had, and that's trying to find a way to get guys like Nick Anderson and Jaden Gibson touches. Those guys seem to make a big play every time they touch the football, and now there's an opportunity for them to get out there and do it. So, guys like Brennan Thompson and guys like Jaquez Petaway haven't even been able to make much of an impact this year. And now that rotation, it kind of steps up to the next level. So I think they're well equipped to handle not having that guy. But it's certainly going to be more of a committee approach to replacing him rather than just one person stepping in and doing it.
I agree with you. I think if there was anybody to, for lack of a better term, benefit from Angelo Anthony being out, I think it's Nick Anderson. Just in terms of overall snaps. I mean, the reality is that Nick Anderson, as great as he's been, I mean, the game-winning touchdown, he leads the team in touchdowns with 6. He has not actually played a ton of snaps. If you look at the snap count data, he's not been out there a ton. So I think not only in terms of the size he brings, I mean, Angelo Anthony brings some size. That's the thing with a lot of those other guys you mentioned, is if you're looking to kind of get what Angelo Anthony brought to the offense, you kind of need size and speed. And Nick Anderson, I think, is the best one to do that. I would expect his snaps to go way up. But yeah, I agree with you, Brian. I think we're going to see a few other guys you just mentioned. I'm really going to be looking at Jaden Gibson. I think Jaden Gibson also sees a bump up, because Jaden Gibson, kind of like Nick Anderson, really, really talented, hasn't been on the field a ton this year. He only has 6 catches this season. So I agree. I think it's going to be both. I think we're going to see a huge uptick in snaps for Nick Anderson, and it's going to be a committee approach in terms of replacing him. But I'm really curious to see what impact this has on Dylan Gabriel. Just in terms of not only where he goes with the ball. Does this mean more targets to Jalil Farouk and Drake Stoops? Mm-hmm. Does it mean he takes off and runs a little bit more? Does it mean Jeff Levy relies a little bit more on the running game? Does it mean he relies a little bit more on Dylan Gabriel's legs? It should be interesting to see. Overall, I do think both things can be true. It's a tough loss, but they have the resources to make up for it. I think both things are true. And then, Brian, I think to end it here, what that win over Texas, I think, did is all of a sudden you look at, not only can OU contend for the Big 12 championship, maybe they can contend for a college football playoff spot. But I think there's going to be some fans, and the team especially, that is going to say, let's not look too far ahead. But I think, with OU not having a game this weekend, I think that means fans, are going to have an opportunity to watch some other games, both conference wise and nationally. Brian, what Big 12 game are you most interested in watching this weekend? Because I do think that watching the conference as a whole is maybe a little bit more interesting, given that OU is now in the driver's seat for the Big 12 title. What game are you interested in this weekend?
Well, and I think that this is, just speaking with you earlier, I think this is the same game you're going to go with. But I think Kansas-Oklahoma State's the game to be watching. Just after what we saw Oklahoma State do last week, they really controlled the game against Kansas State. The final score wasn't really indicative of how that game went. And so I'll be interested to see what they look like, but more so what Kansas looks like, because Jalen Daniels is still out. He's been dealing with a back injury, back tightness, I believe is what they're calling it. And all they did was hang 51 and 400 yards rushing on UCF last week. So you got to be watching that Kansas game, because Oklahoma's got to go to Lawrence in a few weeks. And I think that's probably the easiest place to find a loss, if you're going to find one for Oklahoma. I think it's that trip to Lawrence. So I'll definitely be tuned in for that one. And then I'll probably flip over and make sure I'm keeping up with Iowa State, Cincinnati, because I still think Cincinnati's better than that 2-3 record that they have.
No, I agree. I'm glad you highlighted those two. I think Iowa State, Cincinnati, just because OU's already played those two teams and had kind of different sides of the spectrum in terms of how those games showed up. But yeah, I think Kansas and Oklahoma State is the right call, because if you're looking at the final 6 games of the regular season, and Brent even touched on it on Monday, he said the back half of our schedule is going to present a lot more challenges than the front half. And he's right. As a sum total, OU is going to be challenged more. And I think if you're looking at what games could give OU a challenge, like a real challenge, not to say none of the other teams will, but I think you're looking at Lawrence and at Stillwater. Those are the 2 games, because I think that Kansas offense is for real. It is. I think there's a lot more excitement around that program. And Oklahoma State impressed me. I got to watch most of that Kansas State game last week. They impressed me. I honestly thought Kansas State was going to come in and win pretty handedly.
I did too.
And I thought Oklahoma State's offense, which has been a slog all year, I actually thought it showed some things with Alan Bowman. And I thought for them to get a 26-7 lead, it gave me a little bit more confidence, like, oh, Oklahoma State's not just going to, bury itself into the ground. They actually have some fight a little bit.
Right.
So I think if you're an OU fan and you're trying to project, what does the next half of our schedule look like? I think watch that Kansas Oklahoma State game. Those are 2 games. I think those are 2 teams that almost everybody's going to agree if you're looking at who could spoil an OU Cinderella season, it's those two teams. Brian, I think that's going to do it for us here at the Oklahoma Drill. Thank you so much to everybody for tuning in and listening to us for a few minutes. You can find us. You can find our Oklahoma Drill podcast on our OU Insider YouTube channel every Thursday. You can also find our episodes. You can stream them on Spotify, Apple Music, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. If you're not a VIP member over at OUinsider.com, head over there. You'll get so much content from myself, from Brian, from our recruiting guys, Parker and Brandon. There's so much stuff that we've got going on both here on the YouTube channel and over at OUinsider.com. So check all that out. But until then, Brian, let's enjoy the bye week. Let's get a good weekend of rest here, and hope all fans do the same. We'll see you guys next week.